Hey, what's up guys? Today I want to talk about the best characters in patch 2.0. We're going to be talking about the strongest characters you should be using, the best DPSs and the best supports for every piece of content. Now, some important information before I begin. First of all, I will be talking about characters who are good overall, but we will also be focusing on the hardest endgame content, which is the new Abyss that changed in patch 2.0. So while every character here is, as I mentioned, good in general, I will also be explaining why they are good right now in the current patch, especially in the current Abyss, with the Abyss floor 12 being the hardest it's ever been. And I'll put some numbers on screen showing the HP totals of the current Abyss versus the previous ones. You can see it's really hard. So this video will have a sort of Abyss focus because as a general rule, characters that are good in the Abyss are good everywhere. And to keep the information in this video new and fresh, while I will be talking about the character's general strengths, I will also be focusing on why they are good in the current patch, how a lot of characters got better this patch, and why I believe they are the best in patch 2.0. And lastly, a very important thing to keep in mind is that this list is not ordered in any particular way. We're just talking about all the best characters, but I'm not trying to argue on which character is slightly better than the other, so it's not in any particular ranking. We're just talking about the best ones that you should be using. With all that out of the way, I want you guys to know that I stream most nights on Twitch, link in the description if you're interested. An insane amount of time went into this video, so I really hope you guys enjoy. And with that being said, let's get into it. The first character I want to talk about in this video is actually Ayaka. Ayaka is actually a new character that came out in patch 2.0, and the more I've played her, the more I fell in love with her, and honestly, she's even better than I thought she was initially. The reason for that is because not only is her damage, especially on her burst, very high, but she's also really good at perma-freezing enemies, since her attacks can be infused with cryo and can deal a good amount of damage. When you pair that with the Blizzard Strayer set, that gives her 40% crit rate and some cryo damage bonus, the ridiculous scaling on her elemental burst, and the fact that she can just freeze enemies in place, meaning that they can't move, and that you can burst them down very fast, makes her a very strong carry, especially for the current Abyss. As you guys probably know, for floor 12, the first chamber is generally the hardest one. It's widely regarded to be the most difficult one, and a freeze comp is usually the easiest way to clear it without too many problems. As you can see, you can make this chamber a joke by perma-freezing enemies, not let the Mirror Maiden teleport away from you, and just demolish her super fast with Ayaka's damage. Other than just the Abyss though, Ayaka is just a good carry that shines exceptionally well in freeze teams and can honestly clear any content with ease. Now, while there are some weaknesses, like some enemies that can't get frozen like the Magu Kenki, and so using Ayaka there can be annoying, but overall her strengths greatly outweigh her weaknesses, making her one of the strongest units for patch 2.0. To give you guys a bit more information, her burst can hit up to 20 times, so you'll see the scaling here that might not look too high, this 180% at level 8, will actually be multiplied by every single time it hits, up to 20 times, making it absolutely ridiculous. Continuing the trend of talking about new characters that are really strong, Kazuha is exceptional in patch 2.0 because of everything he offers to your team. Not only is he a great Anemo unit, which means you can run the Viridescent Venerer set to increase your team's overall damage by reducing the resistance of opponents, but he also shines at grouping enemies. As you can see with his elemental skill, he can pull enemies together, displace them, and group them up, which is very important to deal AoE damage and to prevent the enemies from running away using special abilities like, Fatui's or the Mirror Maiden. And that's not all. Kazuha also brings an insane amount of damage to your team, so much so that oftentimes as a support he'll be carrying, because when you stack Elemental Mastery on him, you will greatly increase your swirl damage. And as you guys know, swirl recently got buffed, which means the damage it deals is actually very high, to where Kazuha can easily carry your team by constantly swirling opponents, paired with the ridiculous scaling on his abilities. To show you guys what I mean, not only do all of his abilities have really good scalings, but on top of that, he scales very well with Elemental Mastery by not only buffing his swirls, but also enabling this passive, which as you guys know, increases the damage of all his party members to whatever element he swirls. That means that in an elemental team, when you pair him with someone like Xiangling, he can swirl that element, the pyro, and then greatly buff the damage of your carry or other party members. And so because of all those reasons, I believe Kazuha is amazing, definitely an S tier unit for patch 2.0. And while we're on the topic of Anemo units, the next character I want to talk about is someone who got a lot better recently, and someone who's honestly still underrated despite being pretty popular, and that character is Sucrose. Sucrose is an excellent 4-star, and since she's an Anemo, much like Kazuha, she can not only group enemies pretty well, swirl an insane amount of damage with that buffed reaction, but also greatly buff your team to where she's oftentimes the best option for many different teams. She can also carry you pretty hard. As you can see from the footage on screen, this Taser comp is one of the strongest 4-star teams for the Abyss. It's what I used to get my first 9-star clear using only 4-star characters, by constantly proccing swirl on all of Sucrose's normal attacks, enabling your off-field characters, your off-field carries, to constantly deal damage on all of Sucrose's normal attacks while she applies the Viridescent Venerer set and deals damage by swirling. So she's great as just a general support, but she's also good in this specific specific taser team where she is the one auto-attacking and swirling despite mainly being a support. Also, in case you're unaware, Sucrose is really good at amplifying your team's damage because yes, there's the Verdescent Vendor set that I already talked about, but she also gives a ton of elemental mastery to your whole team with her passives, which makes it very good for reaction teams like when she's paired with the Xiangling or just any Vaporize or Melt carry. On top of that, if you run the Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers on her, this will reduce her damage a bit than if you were to run an Elemental Mastery book, but it will greatly buff your carry's damage, which can oftentimes be very important if you're running a hyper carry in your team. Moving on from those Anemo units, I now want to talk about some characters that make your life a lot easier, especially against difficult enemies. These are two amazing supports that provide you with a lot of utility and a very powerful shield to prevent you from dying if you just make a slight mistake. These two characters are obviously Diona and Zhongli. The reason why I'm talking about these characters together is because they fill a similar role. Now keep in mind Zhongli is a better unit because of everything he provides, right? An amazing shield, resistance shred on opponents, increasing your damage, and a great ult that petrifies enemies and can deal a lot of damage if you invest into him. Diona, on the other hand, is also great because she has a powerful shield. She can heal your team as well, so also be that healer that your team needs, and gives a lot of particles, cryo particles, to your entire team, especially when you pair her with a Favonius or a Sacrificial Bow. So while Zhongli's shield and resistance shred is usually more valuable, Diona also gives you a ton of particles and just utility with her shield that is nothing to scoff at. Because of that, I believe both of these characters are amazing for patch 2.0, especially when you consider that a lot of the new enemies released in Inazuma and in the new Abyss can one-shot you pretty easily. These samurais and the Magukenki, while they can have predictable attacks and attack patterns that you can learn, can demolish you in one hit if you mess up, if you don't dodge at the precise timing, to where having a shield can just make your life a lot easier on top of the utility that Zhongli and Diona provide you apart from just their shield. Now to take a break from all the amazing support characters I've talked about, I actually want to talk about a few carries that are really strong right now. The first character I want to talk about is actually Hu Tao, and Diluc is similar here because Hu Tao is really good at single target damage with her charge attacks constantly vaporizing since it has no cooldown on the pyro application and since her scalings are pretty high. Her burst is a nice chunk of damage that is the sort of AoE part of her kit, and overall she's a great unit in patch 2.0, and the reason I'm praising her in this video is because she did get better in this patch. The reason for that is because the new Abyss, the second half of it actually has a few chambers where there are single target enemies, mainly 12-2 with the Magukenki that can be difficult to clear if your team comp isn't built well. Characters like Hu Tao and also Diluc, who deal a ton of pyro single target damage, constantly vaporizing, are very good for this chamber. And while Hu Tao is a good unit just in general, my main complaint about her is her lack of AoE that you only get through her burst, but she does shine in the second half of chamber 12 to burst down single target fights like the Magukenki, the Ruin Guard, and even bursting down the Mirror Maiden very fast. And she also gets much better with her first Constellation and Staff of Homa, which are two really big upgrades, but even at C0 and without this weapon, she's still a pretty good carry, so I felt like it was very appropriate, especially given the current Abyss, to include her in this list. While we're talking about pyro carries, I guess it's time to talk about Xiangling. I've talked about her in many videos in the past, so I don't want to go into as much detail as some of the other characters here, but basically Xiangling's just a pyro carry that shines at everything since her scaling is so high and she does such good area of effect damage around her. She's just a must play if you like her. As you guys know, her burst snapshots, which means all the buffs will be factored in for the whole duration. So when you pair her with someone like Bennett, someone like Sucrose who can greatly buff her damage for the whole duration of her Pyronado, the damage she deals is absolutely insane. You can see the vaporizes I'm dealing on screen now. She's just amazing at everything she does. Her main weakness and critique is that she requires a very specific team to do exceptionally well, right? Pairing her with Bennett and a vaporize support. But other than that, her damage is just objectively one of the highest in the game. She's an excellent carry, great at AoE damage, and shines exceptionally well once you have her Constellation 4. And as you can see, even in a single target situation, like against the Magukenki, while this is probably her weakest situation, since usually you want her Pyronado to hit multiple enemies at once, even against a single target, she can still clear it very fast and do very well. Lastly, while you can usually run Xiangling on pretty low energy recharge if you funnel particles properly by generating them on Bennett, swapping to Xiangling and catching them, and while that is what I recommend generally, in the current floor 12 with the high tide low tide mechanic, you just get so many particles that honestly you can oftentimes just do like one E on Bennett and get your Xiangling's burst back very fast in the high tide with no problem. Lastly, the new emblem set that came out in patch 2.0 can make her even stronger by giving her energy recharge and additional damage to her burst, making it a very strong set for her. The next character I want to talk about is similar to Xiangling in that they're a very powerful carry that I've been praising for a while now. That being said, they got a lot better in patch 2.0 for a couple of reasons, and so that's what I want to talk about. That character is Beidou. The reason Beidou is so good right now is not only because she got the new emblem set, which can greatly buff her damage like Xiangling by giving her energy recharge and burst damage, but also the current abyss has a lot of floors where there are 2 or 3 enemies. That is where Beidou shines exceptionally well because her burst can bounce between those 2 or 3 enemies, dealing an insane amount of damage. I'll put some numbers on screen showing exactly how much damage her burst can deal, and as you guys can see, it is ridiculous. Once Beidou has her second constellation, the damage she deals against exactly 2 enemies can even be higher than Eula's damage just from her burst alone, and on top of that, it's an off-field ability that snapshots and that can be paired with other carries. Beidou is a character who gets a lot better with 2 specific constellations. The main one you care for is her second constellation, which gives her more damage on her burst, and then Constellation 6 is a nice bonus upgrade that reduces the electro resistance of enemies. That being said, even at Constellation 0, this character and all the other characters I talked about in this video are great and definitely characters you should use. Also, I believe a lot of people talk about Beidou without really mentioning Fischl, who is the electro battery for her, also does a ton of single target damage, and is a great character overall, especially with constellations. So because of that, I kind of wanted to mention Fischl in this video because her role as an electro support and battery is something that you should not overlook and definitely a character worth using. The next character I'm going to talk about is pretty fitting after we just mentioned Beidou and Xiangling, and that is Childe. Childe is a great enabler for both of those off-field carries because he applies Hydro extremely fast by attacking extremely fast, proccing Riptide, which deals an insane amount of area of effect damage, having an excellent burst that can deal upwards of 100,000 at high investment, and by just being a very powerful character. I believe Childe is a great enabler because once again, he allows your off-field characters to proc those reactions. In a Childe Xiangling team, Xiangling is the character dealing the most damage, but Childe is also dealing a lot of damage and applying Hydro, and just such a good character that I really think everyone that has him should use him. I also believe Childe is stronger now in patch 2.0 because not only are his teams better, right? Xiangling and Beidou can both run the new set and are very good in the current abyss, but Childe is also good against the current abyss enemies. You can just constantly apply Riptide to all of them and destroy them very fast. Alright, so now I want to talk about one of the strongest hyper carries who's really good for just any piece of content, but who can especially abuse the current floor 12 by getting an insane amount of particles during high tide and then using their burst during all of low tide to quickly take care of all enemies around him. That character is obviously Xiao. Xiao is great because he has consistent and well consolidated AoE damage, with all of his plunges being able to hit a wide range around him, being an amazing carry to use at basically any stage of the game, especially if you can build a team around him. Xiao's main weakness, although it is usually over exaggerated, is the fact that he needs a battery or another Anemo character to generate particles for him so he can get his burst back on cooldown. And while a good rotation can usually make this not that big of a deal, the current floor 12 that gives you a ton of particles during high tide and then allows you to DPS in your burst during low tide makes Xiao's rotations very smooth and allows him to get his burst back extremely easily with very low energy recharge. And while there are some characters that I personally like more than others, so I am biased to enjoy Xiao's playstyle, in terms of his damage and just his objective performance, he is definitely one of the strongest carries for the current abyss, especially when paired with characters like Zhongli or even Bennett, who can greatly increase his damage, although he is not dependent on them. The second hyper carry I wanted to mention is one who scales very well with investment and who's honestly a lot better late game than early game, and is another character who can abuse this high tide low tide mechanic that is present in the current floor 12. That character is none other than Eula, who can get away with a lot less energy recharge now, and who can be one of the strongest units to speedrun at high investment or even with constellations. I mainly wanted to mention her because she is a good carry, and because, as I mentioned, she's able to take advantage of the floor 12 ley line very efficiently. Now, she is a character who really wants a lot of investment, and her burst, actually similarly to Ayaka, can like miss sometimes or can be a bit janky, but when it does hit, the scaling on it is huge, so being able to use it on cooldown and dish out massive amounts of damage when you crit can be devastating for clearing any piece of content very rapidly. The next character I want to talk about should really come as no surprise to anyone. It's a character who's been widely regarded to be the strongest DPS ever since her release, and that is obviously Ganyu. There's no real secret to why Ganyu is so broken, basically just everything about her is really strong, from her insanely powerful charge shots that explode and deal AoE damage, to her great bursts that can be good especially in freeze teams. She's just a very powerful character overall, and definitely one of, if not the strongest carry in Genshin Impact. Now, Ganyu's always had two very good teams, a freeze comp with Venti and Mona, and a melt team with Bennett and either Kazuha or Xiangling to constantly apply pyro while Ganyu melts, and then usually like Zhongli to shield or a flex slot. Now, while the freeze team is actually worse in this abyss because some enemies can't be frozen and Mona Venti can have less utility than in previous abysses, the melt comp actually got a huge buff to where I really believe Melt Ganyu is one of the strongest teams right now. It is absolutely devastating. The reason for this is because you can apply pyro extremely fast with Xiangling, who does does a lot of damage, while Ganyu literally one-shots everything. The problem with Xiangling in this team is when she's ran as a support who isn't, a DPS, isn't on field collecting particles, she can need a lot more energy recharge, especially in a Ganyu team where she gets almost no field time. And while this team comp is still really good overall, in the current floor 12, it is absolutely amazing because of the ley line of floor 12, giving an insane amount of particles to your Xiangling during high tide, allowing her to run on a lot less energy recharge than she previously needed. Because of that, she can stack a lot more damage, while consistently getting her burst back on cooldown, which obviously increases your team's damage. And while Ganyu has always had some amazing set options like Wanderer's Troop and like many others, the Reminiscence set came out in patch 2.0, which is absolutely amazing for a melt Ganyu. Since you don't necessarily need to use your burst since you're trying to melt your charge attacks, having a 50% increased damage to your charge attacks and 18% attack overall is very good for Ganyu and can oftentimes be your go-to set, especially when you consider how difficult it can be to get a good Wanderer set. Now I want to mention another Anemo character, and I know there's already been like 3, but Anemo characters are pretty broken overall, and so I believe we have to talk about Venti. Now Venti's a very unique case because, first of all, the damage he deals is absolutely insane. His burst can swirl enemies up to 14 times each, as long as he is double swirling them, so once you have 2 or more enemies in your burst. He can reduce the resistance of enemies with the Verdescent Veneer set, group them up very efficiently, and deal a ton of damage. Now you might be thinking that he can have some difficulties grouping certain enemies. He can seem a lot less useful in certain Abyss floors than other Anemo units, but he invalidates certain pieces of content and is undoubtedly the best in certain floors, like floor 12-1 on the second half. Grouping up those Fatuis and lifting up the Mirror Maiden in the air permanently is very, very valuable. Lastly, I feel like it's basically mandatory for me to talk about Bennett and Xingqiu. Xingqiu did get better in this patch by getting the new emblem set, which is amazing on him since it gives you energy recharge and damage, but just in general, Bennett and Xingqiu have always been amazing supports. Bennett by giving you an insane amount of damage, healing you, giving you pyro particles, and Xingqiu for dealing insane amounts of damage with his rain swords, and constantly applying hydro, enabling reactions. Now, I wanted to mention these two briefly because they are both amazing, but they've always been amazing, and I'm sure you guys have heard this multiple times now. There's nothing really new to say about these characters other than the fact that they're just really good. Xingqiu is a support who's needed by basically every pyro character to enable them to constantly vaporize, and who's also wanted by like electro carries and most DPSs, whereas Bennett is also wanted by many teams and usually the best option in most teams as a healer slot. And so as you guys can probably tell, I really went through a lot of characters in this video. The reason for that is because there are a lot of powerful units and units that got honestly better in 2.0 given the current Abyss. I've always advocated for, playing who you like in Genshin Impact, which is why I tried to mention all of like the best characters for this patch. I tried to name as many of the really powerful ones as I could so that you guys can choose your favorites. This video took an insane amount of time to make. I actually haven't slept yet. I kind of stayed up all night making this, so I really hope you enjoyed. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you're new because it does mean a lot and I do appreciate it. With that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed. If there's anything I want to add, it will be in a pinned comment. And do keep in mind that there are some characters that I could have mentioned, like Jean, who's a great healer, Kaya and Rosaria, who are good in freeze teams, but I don't want to make this video too long. So with that being said, I hope this video helped you guys. That's it. I want to end it so that it's not too long of a video. I really hope you enjoyed and that it helped you out. And as always, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.